Welcome. My name is Samantha Abramson, and I am the Executive Director of the Nathan and Esther Peltz Holocaust Education Resource Center, a program of the Milwaukee Jewish Federation. We thank you so much for being part of this kahila, this community. We are joined tonight by our partners at the Coalition for Jewish Learning, Jewish Community Relations Council, Jewish Teen Philanthropy Board, Interfaith Conference of Greater Milwaukee, the Milwaukee Turners, and Ovation Jewish Home. Thank you so much for your partnership. Today, November 9th, is the anniversary of Kristallnacht, also known as the Night of Broken Glass. This was a state-sponsored campaign of violence against the Jews of Germany, Austria, and the Sudetenland, and a major turning point in the Holocaust. Over 2 days, 30,000 Jewish men were arrested and sent to concentration camps. Hundreds of synagogues and Jewish community buildings were destroyed, and thousands of Jewish-owned stores and homes were ransacked and looted. The lack of protest from the majority of Germans made it clear to the Nazis that they could proceed with harsher and deadlier measures that ultimately culminated in what we now know as the Holocaust, the mass murder and genocide of 6 million Jews and 5 million non-Jews. Despite the imminent danger to the Jews and other enemies of the Nazis, most countries weren't willing to allow new refugees to resettle even after Kristallnacht. The world missed the warning signs. At its core, Kristallnacht reminds us of the roles we all play as citizens of this global community in speaking up when we witness anti-Semitism, racism, and discrimination in all of its convoluted forms. With anti-Semitism, both here in Wisconsin and across the globe, on the rise, now is the time to act. Tonight, within the framework of HERC's new Community Learning Lab, we come together to learn from one another and renew our commitment to teaching the next generation about what can happen when hatred goes unchecked. We'll hear from 3 community members whose parents lived in Germany during Kristallnacht and bore witness to that history. We will be inspired by Milwaukee area high school students who are taking the mantle on to remember and educate others about Kristallnacht. And together with our interfaith allies, we will share our dreams for a future free from hatred, persecution, and genocide. Thank you for being here. Shalom.
Hello, my name is Dina Rubnitz, and I am the daughter of a Holocaust survivor. I'm going to speak to you about my mother's experience, the night of Kristallnacht, in commemoration of Kristallnacht 2022. My mother never spoke of her upbringing in Germany. When we would ask her where she was from, she would always say Milwaukee, where her family settled after leaving Germany. It was only as my mother got older that she was ready to speak about her years in Germany. This is my mother's account of Kristallnacht. She was 8 years old at the time. On November 9th, 1938, Kristallnacht, everything changed. My mother's family was living opposite a synagogue in Munich. My mother was ill that night and clearly remembered seeing the shul in flames. My grandmother Gretel then saw men running into the synagogue and taking out Torah scrolls, prayer books, and tallesim. When she realized that the men were not wearing hats, she realized they were not Jewish. Then they set alight the holy items. My grandmother was about to telephone the police when my grandfather Sigmund again had to physically restrain her. As it turned out, Hitler wanted to keep the building for a horse stable, so the fire brigade, then a team of horses and an engine doused the flames. My grandfather rescued his burnt tallis. That tallis was used to cover the Sefer Torah at all 5 of his grandchildren's bar and bat mitzvahs. While most men were rounded up and sent to Dachau that night, my grandfather was spared. He was, after all, an active member of the community, a successful businessman and a long-standing business. But that alone didn't save him. My mother always said there were some good people during the war, but not enough of them. My grandfather and the mayor's son were friends. The mayor did not register my mother's family, and they were spared. In the early days after Kristallnacht, my grandfather was instrumental in obtaining the release of some men from Dachau. My mother said he never spoke of it, but the family surmised that the men were released as a combination of money and pressure from the board of the Grange. Still, my grandfather thought, like so many others, that the brewing Nazi storm would settle soon and Jews would be safe again in Germany. The family in later months were spared registration in towns, and my grandfather again was told to leave immediately as they were rounding up the Jews the next day. The man stated that he told my grandfather this information because the official considered him a war hero, as he received the Iron Cross after World War I. That medal certainly saved his life at least twice when the Nazis came to power, and that Head Start saved our family.
This is really very important. My father was born in Berlin in 1922, and his father, my grandfather, Isidor Tick, after World War I, opened a dry goods store, kind of a mini linen and things establishment where they sold everything from futons and feather beds and handmade shirts to socks to towels to pillows, things like that. And when Kristallnacht came around, my grandfather actually took my father's younger sister to a relative in Spandau, which is a suburb of Berlin, to get away. And he and my grandfather and my father hid in their apartment, which they could see the store out the window and watch the crowds. So my dad was in Berlin. He was an eyewitness to the Kristallnacht. He wrote about it. One of his very famous quotes was that all you could hear was the hacking and the picking of the axes. And then he also wrote that women carried prams, which are baby carriages, and there were no babies in them. They were full of loot, taking things out of the store. My dad did that in an interview in 1995. So the store was totally trashed, and of course, by German law, they had to rebuild the store with their own money, and there was they had property insurance, but of course, the German law then said as a penalty to the Jewish people for their offenses against the Germans, those insurance claims were paid to the state. So he was there and an eyewitness to it. And a year later, in February, the end of February of 1939, their exit visa papers from the United States finally came through after a 5-year wait. Another one of the reasons that it's so important to me is that my father's history was also that he came to the United States, graduated high school, started college, and then got drafted in 1944, late 1944, and wound up serving as what was known as the Ritchie Boys, and was sent back to Germany to help close out the war. And he served on the prosecution team at the first Nuremberg war trials before returning to the United States. When you put all of that together, to me, perhaps the most important thing that we can remember in all of this is that education is now more important than ever.
Today, I would like to share with you my mother's recollection of events that described in her own words the violence and pervasive fear experienced by her family, all German Jews, from the events known as Kristallnacht. My mother was born in Munich, Germany in 1907. She lived through the turmoil of post-World War I and witnessed the ascendancy of Hitler and the Nazi Party. The morning after Kristallnacht, the people in our apartment building who owned a store downtown in Munich came upstairs and told us they heard their businesses were ruined, the windows broken, and the merchandise stolen. They were afraid to go there and didn't know what to do. So this is how our day started on November 9th, 1938. We did not have to wait long to find out for ourselves what was in store for us. Around 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang, and 2 men in civilian clothes were standing there and wanted to come in, saying they were from the Gestapo. They wanted to interrogate her husband, my dad. In the meantime, My friends called and told me that their husbands were also taken. And so we decided to look for our husbands. We drove to the big jail, but the guard there told us they were probably at the Gestapo headquarters. After coming home, I decided to look for my husband on my own, but how was I to get to the Gestapo headquarters? It was located in the famous residence of the Bavarian Crown Prince. I decided to pack a suitcase with clothing and utensils. I went there and asked if I could bring him the stuff. How naive I was. So when I came to the entrance of the building, the Gestapo were standing there. They were all over 6 feet tall. The secret police were especially chosen for this job. I asked the man, who was not unfriendly, if I could enter the building, and he said I could. But when I entered the long hallway, 2 of these big secret policemen in their black uniforms, very tall, came to me and asked, what was I doing there? And I said I was bringing some stuff for my husband, who, as far as I knew, he was there. They started shouting in German, another Jewess, and if you don't leave this minute, we'll take you too. I was scared stiff. On the way out, I saw 2 SS men dragging a screaming woman out. My tears running, I went back to the long hallway. People were at the gate staring at me. There were so many people who must have known that something was going on. I started walking faster until I could get a taxi, which took me home. Herbert spent 2 months in Dachau. Fortunately, my family had a visa with legal immigration papers to the United States via Cuba. They were fortunate to have a sponsor in Milwaukee, and my parents and grandmother left for Havana, Cuba in January of 1939. In October 1939, they came from Cuba to the United States.
So which picture do you guys have?
We have this picture of the kids and adults watching on as a synagogue burns down.
Could you describe the photo for me? Or what do you see?
So mostly it's just a few kids watching as the German firefighters are spraying water on the houses, on the burning houses, all of them besides the synagogues that the Jews would pray in.
And the firefighters are just completely ignoring the synagogue and just taking care of the house. And like the kids, they're like looking at the camera.
Fire hoses are pointing away from the synagogue that's building to stop the fire from spreading, because all they care about is destroying the Jewish stuff and keeping the non-Jewish buildings intact.
I think the also key people in the photo, not that they're visually in the photo, but just the people behind the whole idea of the fire department cannot put out Jewish related fires and all that.
Disappointed, I think, because like even though these firefighters were instructed not to like put out the fires, I think it's like, I don't know, I think it's like a moral dilemma that they still should have, because they knew that without putting them out, it's hurting people and hurting people's identity and who they are and what they believe.
It makes me feel uneasy because knowing that someone did that to like a kid's synagogue, if I was that kid, I would feel really scared at the moment, and I wouldn't feel safe with my identity and really wherever I am.
It's kind of heartbreaking. It's something that I could never imagine in our own society. And to see this is kind of just a reminder of the past. And it's Honestly, just very disheartening to see that this happened, and I could not imagine this happening anywhere near me, not even in this country.
I mean, it's kind of like an uneasy feeling, you know, because we all go to synagogues. Like that, if that could have been us, like if we were in that past life, and you're just like watching where you go to learn and study just all crumble down.
And it's also, I mean, easy to think about because most of us, or at least I have relatives that were in this exact same position, some of which didn't make it out. So just thinking about where they are versus where we are now, it's, I mean, kind of summed up in that photo.
I see a big group of German kids sitting on top of a burnt car that a Jewish teacher was driving.
Probably between like the ages of like 7 and like 10 or 11 maybe.
Yeah, it's like younger.
But not too young.
And it's all boys in the photo too.
Yeah. And they're standing in front of a Jewish car on the ground that was clearly destroyed the night prior. Some of them standing on the car posed, others standing around it looking at it.
They all look just gleeful, and they're just happy to be there, just like having a fun time, not even understanding like the gravity of the situation that is affecting everyone.
How old do you think they are?
They can't be much older than 10, 12 years old. I mean, they're just on that car like it's a playground. They're very, very small.
We know that they had to have been posed because cameras weren't as easy to use as iPhones. So they had to have brought the big camera with them, had these kids placed here.
I think the key players have to be the children standing atop and standing next to the vehicle. But I also think another key player is the owner, the used to be owner of this vehicle. I think that the story of the person who used to own this vehicle explains from this one picture what happened that night or that day.
I think probably like the kids, obviously, like maybe whose car it was that they're looking at, or like who like did the damage to the car.
It's very discomforting to see how normalized this appears to be.
It's very ominous because it tells what's going to happen in the future, and that these young boys who are in the 1940s are going to be old enough to like make decisions and be more than just little kids. Are going to think these things that they've been made to believe.
I think the role I play is telling the story from these pictures, but also from other people's relatives as well. I think that, I know that I should continue telling them these stories and these photographs to my children and to my friends so that they can tell their children or their friends or their family so that they can continue to learn about the atrocities of our past so we do not repeat them.
We kind of like, if we like know the thing, like we carry it on for like future generation, because like once one generation like forgets, like the story's gonna be forgotten. So it's like we play the role of like remembering it and teaching it to others.
Yeah, especially with like more Holocaust, like as it's like further and further away with like more Holocaust survivors like passing away, it's like we are in charge of like passing on the stories too.
I think we have to learn about Kristallnacht and the Holocaust in general, because once like older generations start to die and stuff, we're the only people who would know about this. So we have to learn about it to pass it on, and if others learn about it, they can help play a part in preventing things like this from happening again.
Well, like a lot of survivors of the Holocaust, like it was a long time ago, so they're getting old and like passing away. So it's important to like learn about it and then keep teaching other people so that people don't forget about it.
When it comes to remembering Kristallnacht and the Holocaust as a whole, I think it's important to realize that we are the next generation of society. If we don't tell the story, who will? there's already a lot of people, Holocaust deniers per se, that will say certain things about the actions that happened in the late 1930s and 1940s. But if we don't stand up and say something about what really happened, then it's going to be forgotten. It's important that we tell a story of what really happened. It's part of our culture. Excuse me.
And even though we don't have like first-hand experience, we still have that second-hand experience from reading about these like texts or having relatives, and it's like still a part of all of us that needs to be spoken. So nothing's forgotten, because this should never happen again. And if it's forgotten, then there's a great chance that it'll happen again.
We can kind of learn like what like the beginning of like physical like attacks that the Germans did. It was like the beginning of it all, like the main thing that like started it all.
Yeah, we can also like see how it's like a warning that like nobody thought that like they really had to worry about, and that it was just like something that would like brush over and not make like a large impact on them.
I think we can, I think we learn warning signs, and we learn when things will get bad.
We can learn that we just can't forget these things. So many awful things have happened in our recent history in terms of hatred and hate speech, but stuff like this just cannot happen ever again. It was incredibly unacceptable, and our public servants have a service to provide to everyone, regardless of their religion, creed, gender, whatever it may be. Our government owes us protection. Our government should make us feel safe, and Kristallnacht was a night that cannot be repeated.
I think we can learn the importance of now, not just the idea of not forgetting, but the necessity for action. Even now, seeing the rise of anti-Semitism in America and around the world, and currently, I mean, it was just Halloween and we saw anti-Semitic costumes everywhere, seeing the importance of how we must act and try and protect each other against anti-Semitism now, and seeing how this can happen again. Like, there can be a Kristallnacht any day that could be an uprising and grant people the power to want to do this again. And I think just seeing how important it is to need to protect one another from this and stop it from happening again.
I feel like that it's just one of the most important nights to be able to remember, as it's just monumental in Jewish history, as it is the watershed of what the Holocaust is truly about, which is killing Jews and destroying everything they cared about just because they're Jewish.
Good evening, friends. My name is Emilio Dottore. I'm the executive director of the Milwaukee Turners here at Turner Hall. It's incredibly important for us to take the time this evening to remember the atrocities that occurred back in November 1938 during Kristallnacht. These types of atrocities under the guise of false patriotism are no more than just the lies of otherizing, of making people seem less than they are in an effort to consolidate power. And the evils that were committed then matter no less today than they did. Every day, media and other folks attempt to portray others as less than who they are, attempt to draw lines of division between us and them. And it's important that we stay vigilant. Tolerance is something that's more than just a word. It's a way of living that we need to embrace in our daily actions. Supporting our neighbors and our family, and embracing the fact that we share these differences, and that's what makes us stronger as a people. The Milwaukee Turners back in 1938 took a stand against the actions of Nazi Germany, condemning them and writing to then President Franklin Delano Roosevelt in an effort to make sure that the lives of Jewish folks were protected. It's important that we continue these traditions today too. We watch television, we hear the news, we see the streets, we watch these toxic, heated political commercials attempting to show how someone is different and therefore less worthy of dignity and contentment. And these ideas should be anathema to us as humans. The lessons that we take away from this need to be more than just a homework assignment, but something that guides us in our everyday. And that's why the Milwaukee Turners are pleased and proud to stand with our brothers and sisters here today, letting folks know that never again, and certainly not in our names, will these tragedies continue to unfurl. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ahmed Qureshi. I am the representative of the Islamic Society of Milwaukee to the Interfaith Conference of Greater Milwaukee. I also serve as the interim executive director of the Interfaith Conference. Thank you for allowing me to participate in your commemoration of Kristallnacht. Although it has been 84 years since Kristallnacht, its significance must not be forgotten. In a state where a Jewish synagogue was vandalized for the second time in 3 years in Racine, and in a country whose former president in a 2020 presidential debate refused to condemn white supremacists who later sought to overthrow our democracy on January 6, 2021, we should not forget. Every Muslim should learn and be reminded by Kristallnacht of the suffering of Uyghur Muslims in China, where a totalitarian state has built concentration camps that now house more than 1 million Uyghur Muslims. Or they should remember the government of Myanmar, which is attempting genocide against its 1.4 million Rohingya Muslims. In the Quran, our holy book, Muslims are reminded that God conferred dignity upon every human being, that he breathed something of his spirit into every human being, that he made life sacred and prohibited murder, and that all places of worship in which God's name is extolled, including mosques, synagogues, and churches, should be protected. Let us resolve never to forget Kristallnacht and to stand against anti-Semitism, anti-Black racism, Islamophobia, and all other forms of racial, religious, and ethnic bigotry. Thank you.
Shalom. I am Rabbi Stephen Adams, President of the Wisconsin Council of Rabbis and Director of Pastoral Care at Ovation Communities. The Holocaust was a tragedy of inhumanity on a level never seen before, and Kristallnacht marks the point from which there was no turning back, no ability to stop the hate, stop the violence, or stop the murder of millions of innocent people. It was an even greater tragedy when we consider the lack of opposition to the hate, the bigotry, and the virulent anti-Semitism fostered by the Nazis. It is important to learn from history if we want to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. While the hatred displayed during Kristallnacht was directed primarily toward Jews, hatred and bigotry knows no boundaries. Those who hate people who are different from them will act on that hatred if allowed to do so with no response or pushback. Today, we are seeing a rise of anti-Semitism and so many other forms of bigotry. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said that darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. Kristallnacht is a reminder for us, people of goodness and love, to join together in order to counter the forces of hate. We can never be silent in the face of evil. We can never stand idly by while our fellow human beings suffer. The rabbinic sage Hillel used to say, "Be of the disciples of Aaron, loving peace and pursuing peace, and loving mankind." May Kristallnacht remind us of the dangers of hate and evil, and also remind us of the need to actively pursue peace and love for all fellow human beings.
I think it's important to learn about this time so we really know what happens in history, to memorize and really just think hard about how the world used to be and what it is now. And the fact that we're still standing here today is amazing. I will always remember this day to remind me who I am.
Did you know all about how World War II started and have a knowledge of all the people who died and commemorate all those people who tried to end the Holocaust right as it started?